1, 2. Perfect. One, two. 1, 2. How's that volume there now, Riley? A little more. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Riley? All rise. This Commission of Inquiry is now open. Commissioner James Igloliorte presiding as Commissioner. Please be seated.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and welcome back, everybody, to this final session. We're referring to as a response to the draft recommendations. Very happy to see that everybody else has been able to make it. I understand that Mr. O'Keefe may or may not be here shortly, but in any event, his submission is being covered off. Thank you. Yes, so just one word of housekeeping, and that is, as before, we will be keeping our masks on in this facility, but removing them for the purpose of being able to be heard properly on the PA system. I think we're about ready to begin. I'll just make one little statement from our last session. I hereby refute any optimistic statements I made about being on time or on budget completely. Hopefully that'll work itself out, but yeah, we're very close, thanks to all of your diligent work. I'll hand it over now to Mr. Budden.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just for the benefit of everybody here, since the Commission last met at the end of the round tables, we have been to Labrador. Specifically, our intention was to fly to Mary's Harbour to hear from the Nunavut Community Council, and unfortunately, that trip we were unable to make because of weather issues that prevented our helicopter flying. However, we were able to adapt with the great cooperation of President Russell and his team. And we had a very effective meeting by Zoom and heard from the Community Council and also from MP Yvonne Jones. The following day we went to Nain. That trip was successful, and we heard from President Johannes Lamp of the NG and also from Sid Payne of the Nain Ground Search and Rescue Team. We have further consultations planned for later this week with representatives of the Innu Nation and GSAR and GSAR team members from Natwashish and Sheshashi. So that's a little bit about the work of the Commission. How we intend to proceed today is we'll be hearing from firstly from our mental health Louise Bradley, next from Harry Blackmore, President of Newfoundland Labrador Search and Rescue Association, then from Tom Williams, Counsel to the Winters family, then from Alison Philpott, who is Counsel to the Concerned Citizens Group, Concerned Citizens Search and Rescue, I believe, then from Peter Ralph for the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and then from Mark Freeman and Corinne Bedford on behalf of the Government of Canada and its agencies represented here. So if there's no other further housekeeping matters, perhaps Ms. Bradley, you can begin with your comments on the draft recommendations.
Thank you very much. I want to just some very brief comments and start off by saying again congratulations to the inquiry for including mental health in such a robust way. I think that we heard countless times when evidence was being given of the mental health impacts from the trauma endured during searches by both the searchers and the families. And I think casting a light on that is extremely important. And I think that, you know, the next step, and this is one step towards making the mental health component as important as the equipment and other health components in searches. So I think that the recommendations following all of those evidence and discussions that I had with individuals is reflective of what needs to go forward. So my sincere hope is that those recommendations pertaining to mental health supports and training will be heeded, and that there will be some action taken to implementing them. So thank you very much for including mental health and including myself. It has been a real pleasure, to say nothing of a huge learning curve. But it's wonderful, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. I overlooked one housekeeping matter. We have a number of exhibits to enter, so I apologize, Harry. Perhaps if you could let me deal with this, and we'll turn to you. So we do have some exhibits to enter that either came in at the tail end of our final round of round table discussions, too late for us to enter at that hearing, or have come in the subsequent consultations. So Exhibit 202 would be the Casara PowerPoint presentation that we received at our final day, I believe, or second final day of the roundtable consultations. That would be 202, Madam Clerk, I believe. The next exhibit is the Casara video, also presented at that time, which would be Exhibit P203.
Correct.
The next one was a submission from the Nunatuka Community Council that we received, was presented to us this past week, this past Tuesday, I believe, and or Monday rather, and that would be the submission is Exhibit P204.
Correct.
P205 would be a document entitled Testimonials that was a companion document to the submission, also presented to us by the NCC on that occasion. That would be P205.
Correct.
P206 is a document entitled, I believe, Johannes Lamp Speaking Notes, which was presented to us in Nain on this past Tuesday. That would be P206.
Correct.
P207 is a submission from Leonardo Helicopters that we received late this past week, and that would be Exhibit P207.
Correct.
208 is the submission from Council Williams on behalf of the Winters family that we received yesterday, I believe, or Saturday, and again, that's 208.
Correct.
That's yes, there's one more exhibit. Exhibit 209, received just this morning, is the submission from the Government of Canada and its agencies that, in response to the draft recommendations, that'd be 209.
That's correct.
We anticipate several more submissions. Yvonne Jones, MP, spoke to the Commission also last Monday by Zoom from Mary's Harbour. I understand from her office that her written presentation will be received by us early this week. And I understand as well that the Concerned Citizens for Search and Rescue will be doing a write-up of their submissions that we will hear in oral form today, and that will we receive in writing, if so I'm advised by Ms. Philpott, in the days ahead. So that is it for, I believe, unless I've missed something, Madam Clerk. Thank you. So those are the submissions for the exhibits to enter today, and perhaps Mr. Blackmore, you can give us your response to the draft recommendations. And I should note as well, these very much are draft recommendations. The Commissioner obviously will be considering what he hears here today in the shaping of those recommendations into their final form. Go ahead, Mr. Blackmore, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Since the draft recommendations come out, I know there are a few more exhibits that should be coming in. I think they were sent to the gsarinquiry.ca email this past weekend, so you should be getting a couple of more of those. But after the draft recommendations came out, we pretty well contacted most of our teams that are out there, especially the ones that were involved somewhere across the province and Labrador, to see what they thought of it all. Overall, they thought they were, in their words, all right. And we went down through it all, piece by piece. We are glad to see some of the recommendations that are in there. Some of them, I think, if they ever come to petition, it'll be a miracle. If we can get an MOU signed with everybody that's on this sheet, good luck, because we've been trying it for years. And, but I would like to thank the Commission, if nothing else, for making the general public and I think the government partners aware of how GSAR works in Newfoundland and Labrador. And since the inquiry, it's been very busy. We actually have a team out again today in exploits. It's two young fellas went out in a 14-foot aluminum boat with a 2-horsepower motor in salt water. And right now we were tasked, once we've seen what we had, we actually called in for Coast Guard. And because of certain people being involved, last night the Comrat was dispatched, the Aurora aircraft was dispatched, the Coast Guard mothership was dispatched for this person, or people. They're hard to find because they're all dressed in camo, plus the boat. They're out duck hunting. And other teams have been also out that made some comments on this, from Red Indian Lake, which you all heard out in Grand Falls. They've been out 3 times in the last week and a half. So it's been busy. Some of the conditions of this, coastal searches, we're not 100% sure exactly the way this reads, what's the intent, but we do have a good working relationship with Coast Guard when we do call them. So that one there, it's just keep on going, see what we can do. The 911 part, the association feels that we shouldn't be dispatched by 911. That was only one team's organization. It still should go through the police or the ambulance department if they're being called. We don't self-task, so therefore 911 can't task because they have to go through one of the agencies, or none of our insurances will kick in place or anything else. So that's a bit of frustration for them, but we are working on it. And since then, there has been some meetings on go at the, we'll call it the higher level, of the ministers to do with the whole thing of dispatching GSAR for people that are hurt in the woods. There was another one this weekend in Torngat Mountains. The Cormorant ended up going on the end of it, but that happened this weekend. And it was done through an inReach. That's how they were actually spotted or notified. The funding part, we're happy with that naturally, because if you go from nothing to what's written in this, we got nowhere to go but up. And thank you for the year's work I got ahead of me if that comes true. The insurance part, hopefully this will come and be straightened out. We're trying to get a meeting with government. We had one planned for 3 weeks ago. That was cancelled again, so we're hoping this one will go ahead this month coming. The insurance is a big part of what we're doing, and it takes care of a lot of different things. We're having things like this put in place, especially now that the humanitarian issue has gone ahead basically from the federal government in Ottawa under Public Safety Canada. Now that teams are being brought from all over the country to help with other provinces and territories, so insurance is a big issue. We've had meetings on it Friday past, and we also had them on Saturday, but it is moving forward, hopefully. Recruitment. Recruitment we looked at here, and to our part, we don't see anything wrong with the recruitment. We want to make sure that anybody who wants to join can join. And as I said to Mr. Budden earlier, we don't see holding any particular recruitment for anybody in particular, because we don't have discrimination against anybody. They want to join, join. And so our members weren't 100% behind that one, but it's open to whoever does want to come into the system, and they'll be trained the same as everybody else. And I know there is a submission coming in, and it should have came to you this weekend. It was sent on Friday. Training, we have no problems with the training part of it going through, where it's all feasible to get done. And But with training going into the communities, it's a great idea. We've talked about it for years. But hopefully now, if some of these funds come through, that's what we are planning. But it all will depend on the funding part of it itself. Otherwise, we have to bring one person out and try to train them to go back. And that's all we can do. The areas of coverage was discussed among the teams. We know there is a couple of places we need to put a few more teams, but it takes time, energy, and money to get it done. We have 3 identified in Labrador that we've been working on. One is pretty well a go. But once that gets done, one thing you have to remember, you can't put a team in every single community. I know we'd like to, but it just is impossible to keep the do, and it is impossible to keep straightened out. And the funding, if you think $2 million is a lot, you better open up your checkbook. Because of every single team takes a certain amount of energy out there to get done. So we look at it that if a team is fairly close, one team can cover off other areas. They can have 2 or 3 people, because people can join from different spots and go from there. Civil Air Search and Rescue, we'll be working with those people the same as we always work with them. If we can use them, we'll use them. That's not a problem. Technology, that's pretty well straightforward. As much as we can do with technology, we will. In-reaches, set phones, all that type stuff that we've been using. That's to continue on. And hopefully, if the inquiries funding process goes through, we can help burden some of the teams with that in paying for their in-reaches and everything else that they're using. We had a great discussion on the audit part of search and rescue, and doing an external audit, an assessment and training on the core competency. We follow the national core competencies of Canada, which are laid out by Search and Rescue Volunteers Association of Canada. Straightforward. Everybody here have a copy of those. So that's what we follow. As to bringing in an external person in to do an audit, I don't know who you would bring in, but we're open to any kind of audit, whether it's financial or training-wise. Doesn't matter to us. We got it all done. We're doing it all the time to ourselves. And one of the big things is with our provincial training committee, we have those people who are doing audits on this all the time to make sure that everything is done and tracked under the technology system under Emirates, is one we use. And at the present time, we're involved with a group out of Saskatchewan called CanOps. They're actually doing a study on all the tracking systems right across the country for GSAR. They sent me an invite yesterday, or Friday, matter of fact, to do a meeting in Vancouver in December, so I told them that'll be declined for sure, too close to Christmas. And, but we will talk to them by Zoom, but it's been looked at as between the Emmerich system, D4H, Saskatchewan has a separate one, CanOps is trying to put a federal one in, so there's 3 or 4 on the move, along with Canadian Coast Guard. Mental health, we've already started some discussions with different people. Some people are from the health science that we were dealing with, and I would be very surprised if Miss Bradley doesn't hear from some people by Christmas or just after. We're just waiting to see where all this unfolds first. But that's been a big issue with us, so we're going to go ahead with that one anyway, one way or another, and see where it all goes. The rest of it that we've seen, the interaction with families, to us that's a police thing. We do some interaction with them, but mainly that is a police thing that we see overall. But we're happy with the commission and what we've seen and heard so far. We are looking forward to the final draft that would come out at the end of the month, hopefully, and go from there. We've been talking to the different teams since this came out. Barry Anderson, who you all met, he did an interview with CBC in Labrador. They did call, and we put him straight back to Barry because it was a Labrador. Since then, we had an AGM held in St. John's. We brought asked all the teams to come, we got most of them. And Barry is now the director for search and rescue on the north coast of Labrador. We split Labrador into 2 regions. One takes in all the coast, which will be Barry, and the other one will take in the 3 teams from Goose Bay to Lab West and Turkey Falls. So they're all moving forward with our provincial training team, how we're trying to do it, and go from there. Overall, there's not much more we got to say about it. We think this has to be tightened up a little bit because of the MOU part, and if the commissioner can get the MOU part to work, I know it's only a recommendation, kudos to him, but we all work together in a cohesive way, I suppose. It's just that the bureaucracy part of it a little bit gets everybody frustrated, and that happens. But we have been talking to different people. We met with the new wing commander from 9 Wing Gander last Friday. And we are putting in a NIF grant, which we told you about before. Last year we got turned down to do a highline rescue with the smaller helicopters, because it's all right to say someone's hurt in the woods and stuff like this, but we got to get them out. A lot of times we got to wait 3-4 hours for a helicopter, and so she actually gave us a letter of support from D&D supporting the highline system that we're talking about, which is called Boost, so that if we do have a person that's injured, we can get them out of the woods fairly quick. It's great when you can get them out with the Cormorant, but if you got to wait 4 to 5 hours, which we've done numerous times, that's not on for us. Nighttime makes a bit of difference, but if we got to, we can stay overnight and lift them out in the morning if we got to, or get the bigger gear in. But we still find smaller helicopters better than the big stuff. The bigger helicopters are great for big searches, but in a small area, when they come in, it does make things a bit difficult trying to get everything done, because they blow the tops off the trees and you're just about. So, but we're working all together, and hopefully if we get an IF grant this year, we'll be able to put this in part. If not, we'll be going back to government again. We went back to them last June to try to get this put in through the provincial government, and we haven't heard anything on it since. So hopefully all that part will work too. And they are supporting our NIF program to try to get it through the federal funds, but we don't know if that'll come or not. So overall, that's my take on the recommendations. Like I said, we are glad to see them, and I just hope a lot of it can be put into the system. I do understand it's only a recommendation and you have no power to be able to do it, but I guess then it's up to us to go after the Department of Justice, who we answer to make sure as much of this is put in place as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blackmore. Mr. Ralph, would you like to make yours? No, I'm sorry, I overlooked the Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Budden. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody back again, and hopefully we'll get things wound up today, and the matter will be in the Commissioner's hands. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank both the Commissioner and his staff, as well as all parties in the room, with respect to their sincere expressions and gestures that were shown to the Winters family throughout this entire process. I've had an opportunity, since obviously this matter has been concluded from the formal hearings, to speak with the Winters family, and they are all very grateful for the respect that they were shown, as well as they truly felt like they were included in this process and they were listened to. And I think that's something that's very important. I'll keep my remarks relatively brief, given that I have submitted a very detailed written brief, both for the Commissioner's benefit and as well for the benefit of the family. As we all know, this matter, I guess, came to fruition or started back in January 2012, when the Winters family, together with the community in Labrador at large, as well as the province and even across the country, fought for an inquiry into the loss of young Burton Winters. I think everybody would agree that this inquiry probably would not have happened but for their relentless dedication for nearly 10 years to make it happen. On January 14th, 2021, that all came to fruition when the inquiry was officially called. And although it wasn't solely focused on Burton's loss, it would serve a greater good to try and ensure that this type incident may never happen again, and no other family would have to endure the pain and suffering that the Winters family have gone through. Mr. Commissioner, the Winters family, and on their behalf, we've taken this process very serious from the very outset, both as it relates to the loss of their son and their grandson, and as well as to see improvements to the system as a whole. They've stated publicly on a number of occasions that while they know they can't bring Burton back, they just hope that the system can be improved so nobody else has to go through it again. As everyone knows, the family has been engaged, first working with myself over the last 4 years in particular, as well as meeting with the Commissioner and his staff on a number of occasions, and fully participating in the inquiry proceedings at every opportunity they had. And they, again, are grateful for the opportunities that the province, as well as the Commissioner, provided them to participate both in their home community of Maccovic, as well as having the opportunity to attend in St. John's. They attended every day that they could be here. Mr. Commissioner, as you're aware, we've submitted a very detailed submission on behalf of the family, and in discussing this matter with them, they were of the opinion that their views and concerns should be captured in writing for the record, and given their commitment to the process, they wanted a document that captured their issues and concerns into the future. As recently as this weekend, Natalie Jack emailed me and stated, "Tom, thank you for putting this together. It's difficult to read through, but it will be a keepsake as a timeline throughout this whole ordeal. It means a lot." And while we all have electronic systems, I think being able to provide them with a paper document that they will carry into the future means something. As you know from the outline, I'm not intending to go through the entire submission that we've made, but I think through this process we are grateful that the Commissioner saw fit to take time in Maccovic, as well as his council, to recognise some of the events and to review the situations that happened in relation to Burton. This is something that was very important to the family, and we stated it at the very outset when the terms of reference were being stated that we would like to look on this, at this aspect, and I know there were other cases that were included. I'm not going to go through the detailed analysis of the events back in January 2012, but I think that that study and the time that we spent on it was worthwhile, in that it brought to light a number of things that we can take forward and take out of this, both for the Winters family as well as Ground Search and Rescue as a whole. First of all, the family wanted to note the commitment and the dedication of the GSARS crews and the community volunteers. They said it was absolutely phenomenal how the community came together and went out and helped their family look for their son, as well as the efforts that were put in by local RCMP officers. There were some issues, and again, we're not going to dwell on all of it, but I will highlight them for the purposes of the record, that they had noted in our discussions. There exists obviously some serious issues with respect to the lines of communication as it relates to when GSAR missions are initiated and followed through, those being discussions and communications between RCMP and police resources, GSAR resources, Fresnel NL, and Department of National Defence when authorising and deploying resources. They just feel that this could be done in a more timely and efficient manner. I think also that came out and was a discussion in Labrador is with respect to some of the definitions and application as to what constitutes marine incidents. I know and I appreciate that the federal government are here through their own cooperation, and we are grateful and acknowledge that. And we know also appreciate that the inquiry does not have the authority to make binding recommendations on the Department of National Defence. But I think by having some of these manners highlighted and in the manner in which the Commissioner has done in his draft recommendations, it does allow for consideration by both provincial and federal counterparts of what they could do to improve the system. I think we'll all agree, while none of this can be mandated, everybody wants to see some improvements in the system. And one such improvement may be the review of portions of the operational manuals for search and rescue by the federal government, so that some of the, I think, deficiencies or some of the issues that we saw in terms of defining vessels, defining marine incidents, you know, the Sea-Doo, Ski-Doo example that we talked about kind of highlighted some of the things that could be looked at going forward. There also appears to be some serious issues with respect to Labrador, and this is for search and rescue in general. Labrador, because of its geographical structure, its harsh climate, has its own unique systems. Not only is it the north, but there are a number of coastal communities. And when we speak about the deployment of resources, and whether they be provincial resources or whether they be federal resources, just the time lag of trying to get resources deployed out of various areas seems to be a concern. While we appreciate that the DND do have resources in Happy Valley, in this particular instance, they were down, and so resources may have had to be deployed out of Gander. Well, we were talking timelines between readiness and actually getting there 5, 6, possibly 7 hours. And in the case of search and rescue, that's a long period of time. So given the geographic location and the uniqueness of Labrador, we really need to have a look of having sufficient resources placed in Labrador so they can respond in a more timely manner to search and rescue requirements. Again, whether or not there needs to be reviewing of maintenance and upkeep records, so that in this case, obviously nothing was intentional, but it seemed like the Bermuda Triangle when it came to maintenance records, and that there were a number of resources down, and whether or not there needs to be a review on this aspect. As highlighted by the Commissioner, perhaps one of the biggest issues that surfaced is that the province has no ability for nighttime search and rescue efforts by way of aeronautical resources. This to me seems to be a blatant void in the system. We should not have a system whereby once it gets dark, we have to call off search and rescue because we don't have resources. Obviously, ground search and rescue crews are limited by where they can go in the dark, but if there is proper resources, they should be readily available. And I think that also came to highlight that while we don't anticipate that the province is going to bring on its own helicopter fleet for search and rescue given expenses, we did have the opportunity to see that there are private resources that may be available to be utilized. Now, these are all big ticket items, big ticket money items, and we appreciate that. But that's not to say that the province could not look at a pilot project in consultation with private resources whereby some of these resources could be utilized when required. I guess the final issue in terms of the McGovick matter, and I know it's been highlighted quite clearly in our report, is that there should be a policy whereby no resource is not made available if required to be engaged. Again, I won't go through this in any great detail, but that is probably one of the most troubling aspects for the family as a whole, is that there were resources available that weren't deployed, and whether or not this process and policy protocols need to be reviewed. With respect to the roundtable sessions and the cases that were under study, we thought this was a very good format in that it allowed to see not only the strong points of the system, but also some deficiencies that may exist in our provincial system. There's clearly 26 highly trained and dedicated SAR teams that are committed volunteers across this province. I think it became obvious to all of us who were involved in this process as a whole from the very beginning that we had no idea of the level of commitment, dedication, and training that is required of volunteers. And it's something that I think the citizens of the province should be made more aware of for a couple of purposes, not only for justification of more resources being put into this field, but also for purposes of recruitment, and that we have a lot of outdoorsmen, we have a lot of hunters, we have a lot of people who enjoy using the outdoors, who, if were aware that this service was in need of further volunteers, they may give consideration to the same. Without a doubt, there needs to be more dedicated funding. While government is under tight financial restraints, the area of search and rescue is life and death. This has to be a priority for government, and we fully endorse the Commissioner's recommendations in that extent. As well, when it comes to funding, you also have to look at technology. I know Mr. Blackmore had the occasion to speak to the drone resource that they have, the rovers in St. John's have, and the extensive use that can be made of. While we know there probably can't be 26 drones placed throughout the province, it comes to light that both in the Winters case, and I know in the more recent, some of the more recent search and rescue missions, that missions are delayed given the fact that resources have to be flown in to conduct, whether it be underwater searches, whether it be drone searches, and if we had even regionally placed resources so that this could be accessed a little quicker, I think it would certainly add to the system. So technology needs to be reviewed. Not everything is a money item. One of the things that I think that were highlighted was the lack of communication that exists between all search and rescue agencies. While there is interplay, obviously, between police agencies, we have police agencies, we have ground search and rescue, we have marine search and rescue, and we have GSARA. It doesn't seem, I'll quote, because it kind of resonated with me when she said it, when Edna Winters came out and said, it seems like everybody's in the sandbox, but they're not playing together. It kind of rang through for a lot of reasons. We have all these great and talented groups, but it seems that not everybody is coordinating efforts. And this is just a matter of setting up a system whereby these groups could meet perhaps on a biannual basis to review priorities and seek lobbying of their own authorities to improve the system. And I think this came out through a number of people. I think of both the Concerned Citizens Coalition, Merv Wiseman, and I had the opportunity to speak with other Coast Guard rescue coordinators who said that there needs to be better communication and coordination as amongst resources. And while obviously for jurisdictional purposes we do have provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction, the area of search and rescue requires that these blend together in a better format. The next area that I think we could have a look at without having a big money item is the area of mental health. And I thank Louise Bradley, for her efforts, and I thank the Commission and government because they brought Louise in very early as a support system for the inquiry. But I think as a result of her involvement in this inquiry, we got a bigger picture. It wasn't not just for the support of families that were involved or searchers and police resources. Through our discussions, we realized that mental health has been a major void in search and rescue. And I think, if nothing else, this inquiry has established that. And I think to address some of these issues can be done without a big economic consequence. I guess the only other aspect of people who participated in the policy sessions was GSARA. And I was contacted by members of GSARA after we finished up our hearings. And I think, again, it came to light that this is another resource that we have readily available that is, for all intent and purposes, a volunteer resource. These are people who have their own equipment, who, again, like NL-SARA, are highly trained, and they can't wait to help out. And the message that was given to me through discussions with them is that we're underutilized. We're there to help, but we don't get called to the degree that we could. And again, that's something obviously for the agencies involved to consider and review with respect to implementing changes to that end. Mr. Commissioner, I won't go through all the draft recommendations. I've highlighted some aspects. We endorse all the draft recommendations. Our report highlights it because I'm sure we could all come up with a list of 15 or 20 items we'd like to see, all different from the ones submitted. But obviously, I was pleased that it was highlighted and limited to a degree that we're not looking at hundreds of recommendations coming here that are going to sit in a report and sit on the shelf and never be acted. I thought the efficiency of the report, the draft recommendations, was very good. Our recommendations, we have expanded on some. The issue with respect to communications with families, we thought was very important in that seems to be there, but as Mr. Blackmore noted, that's more the first line of defense that comes to police resources, and yet when asked they don't have any formal policies. They do try to put in practice, and that's not meant as a criticism. But I think something that came out of this whole inquiry is how important communications is with both families during traumatic events as well as immediately after, to keep them updated and things of that nature. So our recommendations are before the inquiry. Like I said, we did add some new ones, and we've also tried to supplement some other ones. But I think the important thing about having submissions and having formal records and transcripts of these things is that even though a report will be formulated and they're frequently not acted upon immediately, that they were there. These reports will be there for families of missing persons. They'll be there for police agencies related to search and rescue, and they'll be there for the Newfoundland Search and Rescue Association, that they will be able to use and to continue to fight to get the improvements that are needed. So this inquiry started on a very small, isolated incident of one mission that meant a lot to a family and to a region. And I think it's grown to serve the province and maybe search and rescue across the country very well, in that those comments that have been made, and there's been evidence adduced by experts in the field, that we will hopefully see benefits to our provincial system and the system as a whole. So once again, on behalf of the family, we thank you for the opportunity to have been involved to the extent that we are, and we wish all the best to you in the completion of your report.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Philpott, would you now like to give the submission on behalf of your group?
Is this working? Okay. So I just have some brief comments, and as Mr. Budden mentioned, we will circulate them in writing just shortly following today's session. So first, we'd just like to endorse the important recommendations included in the draft regarding addressing funding and recruitment for the GSAR groups, mental health support for survivors and GSAR personnel, examination of the 911 communication system in Labrador, and promoting the organization of GSAR teams in communities where gaps exist on the southern Labrador coast. We saw these all as areas that needed to be addressed, so we're pleased to see them as part of the draft recommendations. In terms of proposed additions to the recommendations, there are two topics we feel are also important to consider moving forward. One being a recommendation regarding future efforts to further harmonize ground search and rescue coordination with maritime coordination. And secondly, a recommendation to address the lack of primary resources for large geographic northern regions like Labrador. For example, primary resources being stationed in the Goose Bay Military Air Base or civilian airport. And the inquiry did hear evidence regarding commercial operators in the province that could be engaged for this purpose. And that's all at this moment that we have to offer in terms of comments on the recommendations. And we'll circulate this in writing as well after the inquiry. So we may provide some more details in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Philpott. Mr. Ralph, would you like to now make the submission on behalf of the provincial government?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Budden. Good morning, Commissioner. For those who don't know, my name is Peter Ralph, and I represent the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I understand that the purpose of today's hearing is to provide entities who are involved with this inquiry an opportunity to make submissions regarding the draft submissions which you have released. On behalf of the province, I will not direct my comments to the substance of the recommendations. I will have one comment about the recommendations, but that comment, I would suggest, is more about form than substance. In fact, what I intend to do today is to explain why the province is not making submissions about the substance or content of the draft recommendations. This inquiry was created by an order of Lieutenant Governor and Council. Effectively, the inquiry was created by the executive branch of the provincial government. I'll refer to the provincial government as the province for ease of reference. I think it's fair to say that this inquiry happened because of the death of Burton Winters. And after his death, there was a considerable amount of discussion about what had happened. But much of that discussion was not impartial and not independent. And I'd suggest that that's finally happened. This has happened much later than perhaps it should have, but it has happened. This inquiry conducted an independent examination of the search for Burton. And most importantly, it was done in Makkovik amidst the family and community that loved Burton. So I think the province believes that this inquiry has already accomplished something very significant. I mean, it's interesting to note that the terms of reference did not require you commissioners to do that. Clearly, it was a logistical challenge to conduct hearings in that community, and perhaps that wasn't apparent to the public, but I think many people would have abandoned the plan to conduct the hearings there. The conduct of a hearing in Makkovik was not an essential part of the mandate as enunciated by the terms of reference, but it will be one of the most impactful things to come out of it. And that may not have happened, Commissioner, if anyone else but you were the Commissioner. The province created the inquiry, and what the province wanted to get out of this inquiry is described in Section 9 of the terms of reference. Section 9 states, "The Commissioner shall prepare a final report which shall review the organization and operation of ground search and rescue in the province, including air support for ground search and rescue, and make recommendations that the Commissioner considers necessary and advisable related to ground search and rescue in the province." The province asks you to review ground search and rescue and make recommendations that you consider necessary and advisable. The province did not have to create a public inquiry in order to get advice about ground search and rescue. Civil servants employed with the province provided advice every day. The province could have asked for advice from the civil service, but chose not to do so. The province also routinely retains experts outside government to provide advice, and the province chose not to do that. The province decided to create a public inquiry instead, and there are two main reasons I'd suggest to create an inquiry rather than use civil servants or outside experts, and they are transparency and independence. Clearly, transparency was an essential aspect of the examination of the search for Burton. No other type of examination could have accomplished what was accomplished in Makkovik in September. That examination had to be done in public with the family, the community, and the province, watching and listening to the people that were involved in the search for Burton. And I think we learned a lot. Certainly, it's hard to imagine that anyone who listened to all the evidence did not develop a better understanding of what happened. The other important value of a public inquiry is that in a public inquiry, the Commissioner is independent. And you are independent in a number of ways. Firstly, you're independent to interpret your mandate. The province gave you a mandate, but you were free to interpret how to carry out the mandate as you saw fit. And you are also free to make whatever recommendations you see fit. The advice you give the government will also be independent in another sense. You have no agenda, no axe to grind, and this does not happen very often. A government usually gets advice from people or entities, and the people or entities giving the advice usually have a stake in the matter. Therefore, the province does not believe that it's appropriate at this point to attempt to influence the recommendations or the draft recommendations. To do so is almost contrary to the reasons why the province created a public inquiry in the first place. Now, the terms of reference require that the final report is given to the Minister of Justice and Public Safety. It does not go to the House of Assembly. It is not released to the public first. The report is given to a minister who is a member of the Executive Council or the Cabinet. This is a report containing advice for the Executive Council, and ultimately, the province will consider your recommendations in the context of many competing demands and scarce resources. And this situation leads to really one comment, which I believe is more about form than substance. One comment about the draft recommendations. I suggest that on the behalf of the province that where recommendations are addressed to a government, the recommendation should be addressed to the province and not the federal government. There are two related reasons for this, and both reasons are about jurisdiction. I'm going to ask you to look at one of your recommendations to demonstrate the point. Recommendation 1 states, "The Commissioner therefore recommends that the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador and the Government of Canada, in consultation with policing agencies and GSAR and MSAR agencies, seek to arrive at a memorandum of understanding." And I suggest that you consider changing the wording as follows. "The Commissioner therefore recommends that the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, in consultation with policing agencies and GSAR and MSAR agencies, seek to arrive at a memorandum of understanding with the Government of Canada." I don't think that change in wording changed the substance of your recommendations. And that's why I suggest it's more about form than substance. A provincially constituted inquiry, though, should not be making recommendations, the province suggests, to the federal government about how it conducts policy. Secondly, an examination of marine and aeronautical search and rescue was not part of the mandate of the inquiry. That would have been a different inquiry. It would have involved looking at the legal context for marine and aeronautical search and rescue, both domestic and international. It would have involved looking at budgets for the military and the Coast Guard, and it would have involved looking at demands with respect to marine and aeronautical search and rescue. But it is certainly within the jurisdiction of this inquiry to recommend that the province approach the federal government and ask the federal government to reconsider its policy in terms of its the federal government policy's impact on ground search and rescue. It is fair to say that this inquiry did not look at marine and aeronautical research, search and rescue in a comprehensive manner, but that is not true of ground search and rescue. You are in a position to make recommendations how the province should conduct ground search and rescue. There are also recommendations that are directed at NL-SARA and other ground search and rescue teams. However, I don't think anyone can take issue with that. NL-SARA and the associated teams are conducting a service which can be considered an aspect of provincial policing and therefore within the jurisdiction of a provincial inquiry. Secondly, the inquiry has examined NL-SARA and the associated teams in a comprehensive manner. The province has earlier expressed thanks in a comprehensive manner at the inquiry. However, the province again would like to express its thanks to everyone that has participated in the inquiry, especially the family of Burton Winters. The province would like to thank you, Commissioner, personally for taking on this inquiry. It was no small task, and there are likely many things that we'd rather be doing with your time at this point in your life than an inquiry. However, the province wants to acknowledge that this inquiry will be remembered for several things, and one of those things will be the manner in which it was conducted. Commissioner, you were quite justly respected throughout the province, and why this is so was demonstrated during this inquiry. Everyone involved in this inquiry was treated respectfully, and that's a rare quality, I'd suggest, in an inquiry. But that speaks to you, who you are as a person. The province is blessed to have you as the commissioner of this inquiry, and the province thanks you.
Thank you, Mr. Ralph. If I may, Mr. Commissioner, I just had, I guess, a question for Mr. Ralph, and I'll be asking the same question of Mr. Freeman or Ms. Bedford, whoever makes a submission. The inquiry, as you know, solicited an opinion from Adrian Ding and Michael Collins, which is at Exhibit 198, and the conclusion of that is, I'll just read as follows, the very last section of it. Sorry, 1 second, I'm just reading off a, yes, the Constitution, this is the Constitution of Canada, describes the federal and provincial government's powers, not their responsibilities. How the provincial and federal governments use their constitutional powers to allow effective searches in coastal areas is a question of politics and administration rather than law. By providing a wide area of overlapping jurisdiction, the Constitution provides each government with room to act, experiment, and cooperate. I'm just wondering if you have any comment on that legal opinion or on that conclusion generally, with respect to your submission on the relative powers of the governments with regard to ground search and rescue in coastal areas in particular.
Yeah, certainly the province is familiar with the opinion and don't take issue with the opinion. So I'm not sure exactly what you want me to comment on, but I think it's correct.
Okay, well, that comment is helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Mr. Freeman or Ms. Bedford, I'm not sure whom of you will be making the submission, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Budden. It's Mark Freeman and Corinne Bedford, and we're here representing the Attorney General of Canada and all of our clients' various departments. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We remain, as we have throughout, honored to be able to participate and to hopefully positively impact on the recommendations that you are creating. We have provided a written version, essentially, of what we intend to say here today. I will be sticking fairly close to the script, as they say, given the number of people and departments who take this very seriously and who have given us detailed instructions as to how to proceed. So I'll go right to our written submissions, which are now been marked, I believe, as an exhibit. I agree with my friend, my learned friend, Mr. Ralph, with respect to this being a provincial inquiry, and for that reason, the inquiry's recommendation should most appropriately be directed to the province, primarily, saying the province should seek to, or an equivalent phrase. And I think that doesn't deny the ability to say the province should seek to ask the government of Canada to do X, Y, or Z, and that's, I think, what Mr. Ralph is saying as well, and it's just a minor thing, and we think that that change would be beneficial for the purposes of this provincial inquiry. This is coming from our general suggestions in our submissions. We have several other suggestions there. I won't go into detail. They're mostly stylistic with respect to how things are referenced in the search and rescue world, and we'll let those speak for themselves. And we've spoken to Inquiry Council about those, and it seems like maybe those will be agreeable changes, but we'll wait and see. Referring to the Canadian military as Canadian Armed Forces, for example, and referring to military search and rescue as MSAR, I think may just be a typo or something like that. That'll be dealt with without issue. So in terms of general suggestions, really the biggest overhanging umbrella suggestion is that the recommendations, if they were to speak in the language of the province should seek to, with respect to their jurisdiction over ground search and rescue, that would be very helpful. So thank you. With respect to recommendation number 1, the Government of Canada, obviously we saw the reference to an equal basis in that recommendation, and we found that somewhat unclear, and we hope maybe that can be clarified. Of course, when it comes to aeronautical and maritime search and rescue, the Government of Canada is the lead. So it's difficult to say that Canada should support ground search and rescue in the same way that it supports aeronautical and maritime search and rescue, because really what Canada is doing when it comes to aeronautical and maritime search and rescue is running it as the lead agencies. So we think this recommendation means to say that Canada should provide helicopter resources for GSAR whenever they're asked for, and they shouldn't do a separate sort of humanitarian assistance assessment. I think that that's what this recommendation is really driving at. It's not meant to say that Canada should be the lead on all GSAR, although we were a little concerned that might be how it might be read. For that purpose, I mean, the province at the moment provides its own air support for ground search and rescue, as we know, through private contractors, and CAF, Canadian Armed Forces, is called on a humanitarian basis when necessary. And we would say, for the most part, in 2021, this system is working. The Canadian Armed Forces responds affirmatively to virtually all of the provincial humanitarian ground search and rescue requests, as you heard from Lieutenant Colonel Marshall. The MOU contemplated in that regard really may not change the functional status quo, I guess is how I would put it. If Canadian Armed Forces are already responding affirmatively to almost virtually all humanitarian requests, the MOU may not change that functional status quo, but that's 2021, and that's how we think things are working now well. One issue in that recommendation number 1 we wanted to raise was the idea that Canadian Armed Forces would abandon an ongoing humanitarian GSAR mission for an aeronautical or for an aeronautical search and rescue call, as if to say it's like a light switch where if a call comes and it has an airplane involved, that CAF would just abandon a ground search. It's much more nuanced than that, and Lieutenant Colonel Marshall did his best to describe that. Perhaps it just didn't come through, but once that GSAR mission is underway and CAF is participating, Canadian Armed Forces is participating, they wouldn't simply disappear from that scene blindly without some triaging or decision-making thought process being put into it by the officer in charge. So imagine a scenario where the cormorant is about to lower a cable to hoist someone out of a search and rescue provincially, and an aeronautical call comes in. Well, it would never be that CAF would simply leave as the phone rings for an aeronautical search, without more nuanced thinking and decision making as to what was the nature of what they were doing at the time, and how many GSARs and or aeronautical SARs are undergo at the same time, and where are they. It's a question of urgency and location and mission and the resources. So there's a thought process there. It's not as simple as a light switch, I would call, the analogy. I think the thrust of the first recommendation is that the province presently doesn't have sufficient owned or contracted air support for ground search and rescue. And the inquiry is suggesting that maybe the province and Canada could arrive at an MOU in that regard. However, we do note that the inquiry heard evidence respecting commercial operators in the province being able to provide contracted air support to the province for ground search and rescue. And the province is responsible for ground search and rescue. So if the inquiry wants to recommend that the province improve its air support for ground search and rescue, which makes sense, then the focus shouldn't be so limited as to just the MOU, potential MOU with Canada. You can never say, and Mr. Blackmore's points are well taken, you can never say that an MOU will be struck. People can make best efforts to do so, but governments and politics and resources and things will play into that. And so the idea that if it's been identified that the air support isn't sufficient, to just use the MOU as the only suggestion to the province, maybe leaving it not fully developed, I guess. Perhaps you could say to the province, seek an MOU with Canada and or contract provincially with private operators as necessary. Basically, to put it another way, suggest to the province that they improve their air support, and then leave it to the province to determine how best to do that, or suggest menu options for them to pursue. So that's with respect to recommendation number 1. We really think that there's something there that can be developed. Maybe if the commissioner would consider our comments on that, we would appreciate it. With respect to recommendation number 2, we see this one as almost the flip side of the coin, and appreciate the gesture. Although what we would say is in respect of the opposite situation, where it's a primarily aeronautical or primarily a maritime search and rescue, the inquiry really hasn't heard enough evidence, and because it's not really the mandate of the inquiry to deal with those types of searches when the lead agencies are CAF or Coast Guard. So the inquiry appears to be recommending here what Canada should do and able to better respond to aeronautical or maritime incidents when they need to call on GSAR. And this would be sort of like what happened in Makovic when we had a downed aircraft and CAF couldn't get there and needed the heroic efforts of ground search and rescue people. Canada's not presently encountering any difficulty engaging GSAR resources when needed. And so the MOU that maybe is contemplated here, we don't feel will be necessary at this time. There are mechanisms in place for JRCC to call NLSARA and or the province to get that, or the RCMP for that matter, to get ground support when needed. And those mechanisms are functioning satisfactorily. So number 2, we would say respectfully, is somewhat outside the mandate, and we'd also suggest maybe not necessary at this time from our perspective. In terms of recommendation number 3, a lot of our clients are experts in this area, and that's probably why they don't feel that there's uncertainty and confusion around coastal searches. They live this work every day, and the system, again, in 2021, they feel is working. We agree with the legal opinion, as Mr. Budden has mentioned, that this is an area essentially of cooperative federalism, where each of the respective governments has occupied the field, as they say in constitutional law, in a certain way. And the field has been occupied as it has, and that's the way things are working, and we think they're working well. So, but we think that it's correct that the public and possibly people in the system aren't clear on how that works. And so we've done our best to describe the Aeronautical search and rescue is a search and rescue involving an aircraft, and that's going to be led by Canadian Armed Forces. Maritime search and rescue is going to be involving a vessel in a federal waterway, and that's going to be led by Coast Guard. And then anything else, anything that's not aeronautical and maritime is ground search and rescue. And the players who answer the calls and go out in the middle of the night have a clear understanding of how this works. But perhaps if the province were to produce a document to educate the public, or perhaps the report itself will do that task to educate the public as to how coastal searches are organized, because we do feel that they're working appropriately. So recommendation number 3, we think, could maybe not an MOU, but perhaps just the report itself may do the work here, which is to educate the public as to how an aeronautical search is run by, and a maritime search is run by the feds, the federal departments, that is, CAF and or Coast Guard through JRCC as the lead agency, and then a ground search and rescue incident, which is run by the police as the primary agency, consulting with the province. So that's recommendations 1 through 3. The next recommendation we wanted to make a comment on is recommendation number 6. Canada's mildly concerned, I would say, that about whether this recommendation could be interpreted as meaning that NL-SARA are only covered by insurance if the RCMP are involved in a particular mission. And so we wouldn't want to get in a situation by the recommendations where our RCMP could be bootstrapped essentially to searches in order to make sure that that coverage is in place. But we agree with the thrust of this recommendation, which is that the present insurance coverage for NL-SARA seems to lack clarity, and we agree that perhaps this recommendation could ask the province to advise NL-SARA about their current coverage, and maybe in an organized fashion say, if you are sent out by RCMP, here's your coverage. If you are sent out by CAF, here's your coverage. By Coast Guard, here's your coverage, or how that all works. We think that we agree that there may be some lack of clarity there, and we've heard that from NL-SARA. So we just wouldn't want this recommendation to lead to RCMP being added on to a search when it wasn't really their primary search, just to get the insurance coverage. So more clarity in that regard would be helpful. So recommendation number 6 is a positive one overall. With respect to recommendation number 14, this is with respect to mental health training for dealing with people who are lost who may have mental health issues. This hasn't really been the subject of much exploration at the inquiry, but the RCMP does provide that sort of training already to its members, and so while it may be helpful for NL-SARA or other participants in the system, we feel that training that RCMP is receiving with respect to dealing with people with mental health issues is presently working. But more training in these areas could never hurt, and so we appreciate the gist of what's desired there. But we do want to say that the RCMP does train its members with dealing with people with mental health issues who are involved in the justice system and or who are lost. With respect to 14.2, so that first comment was on 14.1. With respect to 14.2 of your recommendations, Mr. Commissioner, respectfully, Canada thinks that such an initiative should be clearly directed again toward the province, and that may be covered by my earlier comments. But the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, maybe in consultation with the agencies, could determine how to assign such an individual, if such an individual is assigned to help with finding people who have mental health issues. So it's important that the more clarity about who's responsible for what when it comes to the recommendations would be helpful, and this is one where you wouldn't want there to be confusion in the middle of the night about who's getting the person to help us understand the person with autism spectrum or something like that. It would be good to know that it's a provincial contract that's in place. This person will come and help and talk to the searchers as needed then, or how that might work. So just some more clarity in that area, perhaps with 14.2. With respect to recommendation number 15, and this is for the mental health of the people participating in the system more so the officers, NL-SARA members, and things like that. Again, we want to make sure that the inquiry understands that the police officers, while some of them you did hear from have experienced critical stress from their jobs, they are receiving support, and we've listed some of the support that they do receive here in our written submission. So the RCMP members themselves, while while experiencing trauma still from some of these searches, in particular Winters, for the search for Burton Winters. They are receiving support, and but of course we'd support that funding from the province for mental health services for NL-SARA is a good idea, and if NL-SARA is not presently sufficiently covered in that regard, then more funding for employee assistance program or whatever the equivalent might be provincially makes sense for recommendation number 15, that is. So we think the police are, the RCMP anyway, are in okay shape in that regard when it comes to taking care of the members. With respect to recommendation 16, the RCMP generally assigns a family liaison when a GSAR incident occurs. And we do have RCMP policy to that in that regard, so it's exhibit number 11 at the inquiry here. It talks about how to designate a family liaison officer and communicate with the family. That said, there are times when those communications break down, and we understand that that can be very painful for the families involved. So, but the RCMP does make an effort to do that, and I'm not sure on the RNC side how that works, obviously. And perhaps this is more directed to them, but we do have a policy in place about regular interactions with families during incidents. In terms of long-term follow-up, though, with families, that wouldn't be something we would see as a police matter. Normally, the RCMP's involvement ends when the file is closed. So a long-term follow-up for mental health would be more of a provincial healthcare mandate, we would say, with respect to recommendation number 16. And really, that is that's the sum of our comments here today, Mr. Commissioner. We are honored to have been able to participate. We hope that these comments, which you'll receive in writing as well, will be helpful and as you finalize your recommendations, which for the most part seem that they will be very beneficial for all the parties involved. And so, unless you have any questions for us, I'll conclude our submissions there. Thank you.
That's it for the evidence here today, I believe. If I may, Commissioner, if I may make a couple of comments. It's the last day of the hearing, and I would like to thank everybody on the Commissioner. I'm sure will make his own remarks, but just on my own personal behalf, I was ironically somewhat the last person of the major players as they then existed to come to this inquiry, in that there was already the inquiry had been called, and Mr. Williams, of course, had been engaged on a long-term basis with the Winters family, but Mr. Ralph and Mr. Carter and Mr. Freeman and others here had already been involved and had done a terrific amount of work and background work, and I benefited from not just that, but from their willingness to help educate me in the early going especially, and all of that was offered with real grace and a spirit of cooperation, which I'm very grateful. And just on my own behalf, as this will be our final session, I would like to thank Council and Mr. Carter and Mr. Blackburn, Ms. Bradley, and everybody else who has been part of this inquiry for the cooperation and constant decency and spirit of collaboration that they have shown, myself in particular, and also the staff that we've been extremely fortunate to have, Ruth Steele and Marcel Mulrooney. It's I've been involved in a number of commissions, and I think this is the one. Even it needn't have been this way, because it's there's a horrible loss at the heart of this, and other searches we looked at also involved loss and heartbreak. But the parties involved, and especially the Winters family, and also the Sweetapple and Lovell families and others, rose above their personal traumas to act in a progressive and ultimately an extremely respectful manner to all the players, and that really made for an experience that could have been very confrontational and bitter and divisive. I think that it is instead something that hopefully will be positive for everybody going forward, particularly for people who are yet to be lost and to go missing and hopefully will be found. So, and finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Commissioner for taking me on back in January, and whom I've had the pleasure of working together in many capacities, including appearing before him for the first time 30 years ago. And working with you has been a pleasure every minute of it. Thank you. So on my behalf, I did want to take the liberty of saying those comments and to thank everybody personally for the great help that's been extended to me.
Okay, any additional closing comments before I wrap this up?
I just had a question there from my client. He was wondering if we can expect additional modified recommendations as a result of the the new presentations, I guess, last week in Labrador, where you had attended, that NCC or named GSAR, I believe.
Yes, that's a very good question, and thank you, Ms. Philpott. And one I should have clarified, that was my oversight. We have, as I said at the very beginning, everybody will have noticed that these draft recommendations had a preamble that said, firstly, these are draft. They will be stronger for the submissions here today, I believe. And also they will be stronger for submissions that we had yet to receive when we authored this 2 weeks ago, that for weather and other reasons, it was simply not possible to have some very important consultations that have now taken place. So I don't believe we're anticipating a further round of draft recommendations. There isn't time for that. But just as the comments here today will inform the final report and the final recommendations, so will what we heard virtually from Mary's Harbour and we heard in person from Nain, and we will hear this week in Goose Bay, and further consultations that we've had discussions around with other parties. So yes, the answer is yes. Okay. I think that I can say that the what we heard in Mary's Harbour, where I think you may be referring to in particular, but other matters will inform the final report and final recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
In a similar vein, I expect Federal Council, you may want to look at a recently received exhibit, Cormorant Midlife Upgrade Project. So if you want to put a federal lens on that before things are all said and done, we'd be happy to receive that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We'll certainly review anything that you direct us to and respond as needed.
Sure, and I should also say that as these documents have been entered here today, and we anticipate a couple of more that will be entered, and there will likely be transcripts posted online. So if parties feel the need to respond to those, that can be done in writing. I would ask that people try to do it in a timely fashion, because we're very, very close to our final deadline.
Well, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for having participated and made your submissions today. It's very clear that the level of advocacy that you bring to your area of responsibility is extremely high, and it's appreciated by the Commission. My thanks should go out to Ruth and Marcella for the wonderful work that they've done since we began, and we haven't forgotten Richard Smith, who was contracted through the grace of the province's council, and we certainly found the right individual to give us the necessary overall view of ground search and rescue, as well as what he famously now refers to as interoperability. And without that interoperability discussion, I think that there will be a lot missed on this inquiry. Absolutely, this has been a learning experience for the Commission and for the public in general, as Federal Council points out, that the nuances of how the ground search and rescue system works and how the federal ground search and rescue system works does have some areas where we have to consider what happens between the two levels of organization. And if we simply make a statement that there is one solution for both the province and Canada, the nation, we're really missing out a lot of what actually happens. As for the generous comments you've made about myself, I want to remind you that I'm handsomely compensated for what I do. I do want to reflect on what is mentioned in the trilogy of works around Canadian inquiries. And in one of them, I read from an author named Youssef Kodzi, who says, the uniquely Canadian model of investigating wrongs and developing solutions to public policy issues is done through the use of inquiries. And he talks about how council have to use their evidence not to prove or disprove a criminal charge or to assign fault between civil litigants, but or in criminal cases to criminal charges, and in case of the civil litigants, but as lawyers to study holistically how certain events transpired and to make meaningful recommendations to alleviate a particular problem and to prevent its reoccurrence. And you have all very seriously adhered to this Canadian Institution of Inquiries in the way that you've presented yourselves and the position of the parties for whom you are a very able advocate. Without either of any of you having been participating, this would really have been an exercise of one hand clapping. It would not be able to have been done without the kind of information each one of you have presented. So we're very grateful for the knowledge you're giving not only to the Commission and my council, but also to the province and the country as a whole, recognizing the value of volunteerism, recognizing the value of the federal constitutional arrangements we have between the province and Canada, and also, most importantly, seeing that there are many areas which allow both of these parties to work together to achieve a great nation. So I want to say in closing that it's been a wonderful exercise, that we, Mr. Budd and I, will try to stick to the schedule that the province has given us, apart from possibly a little delay, but hopefully I'll push him very hard in at least trying to get to that point. So thank you all. Thank you for your attendance, your participation, and your willingness to work for the province and for the country. Thank you.
All rise. This Commission of Inquiry is concluded. Thank you.
Thank you.